Without objection, gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, on this day in 1971, John Kerry showed his true colors, and they are not red, white, and blue. Before the Senate, before America, and before the world, he blasted our nation, chastised our troops, and hurt our morale. He famously declared that soldiers tortured innocent Vietnamese and that America was the worst violator of the Geneva Conventions, not Vietnam. In '71, when John Kerry had the freedom to stand up, to defy duty, honor, and country, I just emerged from 4 years of solitary confinement, where the Vietnamese did not adhere to the Geneva Conventions. What he did was nothing short of aiding and abetting the enemy. A person like John Kerry does not belong in the White House. Is it any wonder my comrades from Vietnam and I have a nickname for him similar to Hanoi Jane? He's called Hanoi John. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to extend my remarks in the record and to include therein extraneous material notwithstanding the fact that it exceeds 2 pages and is estimated by the public printer to cost $2,900.
Without objection. The chair would ask members not to refer to senators who are candidates. Gentleman from Illinois, in a personal way. Gentleman from Illinois may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, today's New York Times states that middle-class families are being edged out of the prestigious universities by rising costs of college education. Access to college for middle-class families has worsened over the last few years. Another example of the middle-class squeeze in America. The greatest disservice that we have done to middle-class families in America is to convince them of the necessity of college education for their children and then priced it out of reach for their children. College tuition at public universities has increased by 14% last year, and in certain states by 20 or 30%. In my home state of Illinois today, when a college graduate gets a diploma, on the backside is the first visa bill. Every kid graduates with an average of $14,000 of debt. College tuition is running 3 times the rate of inflation, but Congress has not made the investment in higher education as costs have soared. While college costs have skyrocketed, Pell Grants have been frozen for 3 years. And on the year in which we are to reauthorize the Higher Education Act, which deals with Pell Grants and Perkin loans, what has Congress done? I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman from Wisconsin. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, it is my great honor to recognize before this House the brave members of the 432nd Civil Affairs Battalion who are returning home today from their overseas deployment. Northeastern Wisconsin is often called the land of legends for our fabled football team, the Green Bay Packers. The gridiron leadership of men like Lombardi and Lambeau and Nitschke made Green Bay synonymous with strength and courage and triumph. But it's not our sports heroes who make our area truly legendary. It's our servicemen and women who have put their lives on the line to defend freedom. Under the most difficult conditions, the brave troops of the 432nd have strived to rebuild a nation that's been torn apart by tyranny and war and strife. Obviously, our work there is not yet done. But we can take comfort in the fact that some of our finest countrymen carry the torch of liberty in Iraq. Mr. Speaker, the members of the 432nd, along with all of our servicemen and women, deserve our praise, our support, our gratitude. They are genuine heroes.
Gentleman from Connecticut.
I thank the chairman and ask for the right to revise and extend my
Without
remarks.
objection.
Mr. Chairman, since Medicare was founded, medicine has changed and seniors have changed. We all know how medicine has changed. MRIs, open heart surgery, all the dramatic procedures, all the new diagnostic tests. And Medicare has a cumbersome and slow way of accommodating to its system to be able to deliver modern medicine. But more importantly, seniors have changed. They're living longer, they're living with chronic diseases, and Medicare has not accommodated at all to that dramatic change in our seniors' lives. And so I was delighted this week to announce with Secretary Tommy Thompson the implementation of those provisions of the Medicare Modernization Act, which will for the first time enable Medicare to deliver to our seniors modern medical care in support of chronic illnesses. 20% of our seniors have 5 or more chronic illnesses. They use 2/3 of the Medicare dollars, and we have not been able to deliver what modern medical science knows about how to prevent the progress of chronic illness. We started today through the Medicare Modernization Act, which we voted through in this House, to do just that.
Gentleman from Texas. Without objection, gentleman's recognized.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've heard several times about how the embedded costs of the medical justice system, medical liability, negatively impact the medical system in this country. In fact, I think on Fox News over the weekend they had a rather dramatic piece on how the cost of soaring premiums has driven some doctors out of practice. But make no mistake about it, while it may affect the doctor's livelihood, it ultimately affects access for patients. In my district, that has meant perinatologists, specialists who deal in high-risk obstetrics who've closed their shops, neurosurgeons who've left town, trauma centers that have been put at risk. Traveling to Nome, Alaska last summer, I was told by a group of doctors there that they could not afford the liability premiums for an anesthesiologist in the town of Nome, Alaska. When their obstetricians have a complicated pregnancy, they have to put that woman on the plane and send her to Anchorage. I fail to see how that furthers patient safety. Director of a residency program told me that currently they are now accepting people they wouldn't have interviewed for their obstetrics and gynecology program 5 years ago because young men and women do not want to go into obstetrics and gynecology. Mr. Speaker, we have a president who will sign a medical liability bill. We have a candidate who has either voted no or been absent when that bill has come to the Senate.
Gentleman from Montana. Without objection, gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, for the first time in history, seniors across the country are about to have an option of choosing Medicare prescription drug coverage if they so desire. Beginning May 3rd, thanks to the improvements we made to Medicare, each beneficiary will be entitled to select a prescription drug discount card of their choice that will provide immediate savings, including a $600 credit for qualifying low-income individuals. Those who voted against these changes don't seem to want seniors to know that the new prescription drug coverage will help 14 million low-income Medicare recipients who need it most, those who are having to choose between food and medicines they need. For the past 4 months, those who voted against the drug coverage have not been sharing with seniors information about the new opportunity to sign up for prescription drug coverage. Why shouldn't seniors be allowed to learn that they will soon have choice and control over their prescription drug plans? Don't seniors have the right to know that their new coverage will give them better access to more prescription drugs at lower price? Don't they have the right to know that if they already have prescription drug coverage, that they can stay with their plans if they like it? 10 days from now, seniors will be free to choose for themselves.
Gentleman from Minnesota. Without objection, the gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today with many of my fellow veterans in this body to bring attention to a serious decision facing our nation. Very soon, the American people will be asked to make an important choice. We'll be asked to decide who will best lead our nation for the next 4 years. One candidate, John Kerry, would claim to have the best interest of America at heart. However, Mr. Kerry's history tells a different story. 33 years ago today, he stood before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee disparaging our brave servicemen and women as murderers. Yet today, in pursuit of the presidency of what he called, quote, a hypocritical nation, he boasts of his service alongside them. Every man and woman who has stood in the defense of our nation deserves our thanks. But John Kerry's service does not excuse him from joining ranks with Jane Fonda and others in speaking ill of our troops or their service then or now. On the anniversary of these outrageous claims by John Kerry, I believe we must remind the veterans of our United States Armed Forces, past, present, and future, of our appreciation, of our thanks for their service to our military and our nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman from South Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute advisory.
Without objection, gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, 33 years ago today, John Kerry appeared before the Senate to talk about Vietnam. Many veterans, including myself as a veteran, view John Kerry's testimony that day as one of the worst public slanders ever against the valor and character of the American military. In a sad act of political theater, John Kerry accused American soldiers of rape, torture, murder, and even offered up comparisons of Genghis Khan. What he said that day has been discredited. Some of the men used as sources for war crimes later were found to have never been to Vietnam. Yet, just last Sunday, on Meet the Press, John Kerry failed to apologize for his extremist accusations. His words in 1971 are important because he used false information to turn public opinion against the men who were serving their country honorably, such as our colleague Sam Johnson, who survived 7 years as a POW in Vietnam. These troops returned to face unfair persecution, and John Kerry owes them an apology. In conclusion, may God bless our troops, and we will never forget September the 11th.
Gentleman from Maine. Without objection, gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is Earth Day, and the President is coming to my home state of Maine to speak about the environment. Unfortunately, the administration has taken us backward in protecting the environment, and Maine is worse off because of it. In August, the EPA rolled back pollution control.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, Colonel Bud Day, former Vietnam prisoner of war for over 6 years, recalls in his book on how Jane Fonda, Ramsey Clark, and John Kerry energized the enemy through their accusations and hurt them as prisoners of war. Mr. Speaker, I was shot down over North Vietnam at that time. I can remember the anger and the disparaging remarks that John Kerry made about our service. I remember the rage in all of us from his slander. I'm proud of the men and women that I served with in Vietnam and those that are serving us at great risk today in Iraq and Afghanistan and all over the world. Even today, John Kerry votes against defense, the military, veterans, and intelligence bills that would force the safe return of our men and women. We do not need a Jane Fonda as Commander-in-Chief. I yield back.
Chair would remind members that personal attacks on members of the Senate do not comport with the rules of the House. The gentleman from California. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, when Americans watched U.S. troops take Baghdad through embedded media, they saw the American GI in his true character. They saw a GI who was compassionate, who was honorable, and who had great courage. In a way, they saw also the GIs of Vietnam, because in many cases those were the sons and granddaughters of people who had fought in Vietnam, people who had the same character, the same honor, the same courage. And yet we've had a person who's running for president, Senator John Kerry, describe those people as having murdered 200,000 people in Vietnam, being stoned on pot 24 hours a day, that is, he said 60 to 80% of them, and ravaging the country in a Genghis Khan-like fashion. I think Americans have a choice. If you feel that your son or daughter did those acts in Vietnam, if that was a true characteristic of American GIs in Vietnam, if you served in Vietnam, if you think your husband conducted himself in that fashion, perhaps you want to vote for John Kerry. If you think that's a wild-eyed, nutty statement that is not an appropriate statement for somebody running for President of the United States, vote against John Kerry.
Gentleman from Nevada. Without objection, gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today also to highlight some very troubling remarks by John Kerry, who is now seeking the President of the United States, our Commander-in-Chief. In 1971, Kerry testified before a Senate committee that communism was not a real threat to the United States. He went so far as to say that the U.S. was, quote, reacting under Cold War precepts which are no longer applicable. Ladies and gentlemen, that was 1971. I think we can all agree the Cold War was very much applicable and continued to be for the next 2 decades. Now John Kerry has the gall to compare our efforts in Iraq to Vietnam. Mr. Speaker, as a veteran of Vietnam War, I take great offense to Mr. Kerry's statements then and now. Our efforts in Iraq have liberated millions of civilians from a brutal dictator that has used weapons of mass destruction against his own people. The world is a safer place without Saddam Hussein in power, and the United States is a safer place with President Bush as Commander-in-Chief.
Gentlewoman from Tennessee. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Nashville Business Journal recently ran an article titled, "Kerry Plan Would Cut 100,000 Government Contracting Jobs." This was reporting how John Kerry's plan to eliminate 100,000 private sector contractor jobs. Well, apparently, he doesn't feel that the private sector provides much bang for the taxpayer buck. His solution is bigger government, less competition. According to the Professional Services Council, small businesses would bear the brunt of Kerry's return to big government. Last year, small businesses competed for and won $63 billion in government contracts, equaling more than 25% of the federal government's contracting budget. Study after study has shown that contracting with our nation's small business sector reduces the cost to taxpayers, conserving taxpayer dollars. That should trump favors to special interest in big business any day. Mr. Speaker, those of us in touch with folks outside the Beltway know small businesses make this country run. Thank you.
Gentleman from Florida. Without objection, gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, 30 years ago, a Vietnam veteran went to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he delivered a stinging indictment of our American troops, all the American troops serving in Vietnam. He stated that murderous and other crimes were, quote, not isolated incidences, but crimes committed on a day-to-day basis with a full awareness of officers at all levels of command, end quote. That of an individual who alleged that our military openly and systematically violated the Geneva Conventions more than any other body is now running for president. That's Senator Kerry. Many of these charges rose from the Winter Soldier investigation, where activists gathered to describe these war crimes. It was later learned that many of those who confessed these war crimes never served near a battlefield. It was a fraud. Senator Kerry disparaged the honorable service of all the countless veterans who served in Vietnam with these charges, and he should apologize for what he said against his fellow veterans.
Gentleman from Connecticut. Gentleman recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, especially with so many in the gallery today, I rise to defend John Kerry from the onslaught on the floor today. A decorated veteran in Vietnam, a person who received 3 Purple Hearts and the Silver Star for serving with distinction. And now, because he's a candidate for President of the United States, he receives the unbridled attack from the opposition. We ought to rise above this here on the floor of the House and across this debate in this nation. What we need to do is focus on the issues that this country desperately needs to address. Seniors that need prescription drugs, people that are out of work and unemployed. And what we need is leadership. The kind of leadership that John Kerry provided in the fields of Vietnam, that he's provided with distinction in the United States Senate, and that he will provide as President of the United States. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
From Missouri. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, for too long, seniors have been paying extraordinary high prescription drug costs with no relief measures in sight. But thanks to the recently signed Medicare and Prescription Drug Improvement and Modernization Act, Medicare will now provide drug cards to all seniors who need them at a cost ranging from a $30 maximum each year to free. These cards, even for those who would get them for free, are completely voluntary. They'll be made available to seniors beginning June 1 of this year. Low-income seniors will have a $600 annual credit on their card, and seniors can sign up for a Medicare-endorsed discount card as early as May 3. Seniors are encouraged to find out which card is best for them by calling 1-800-MEDICARE and asking about drug savings. Seniors and their families can visit www.medicare.gov to find out more about which card is best for them where they live. I encourage all seniors and people who care about them to inquire about enrollment, to see if this is a better plan for them, and to begin immediately saving on their drug cost. I yield back.
Washington. Without objection.
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I came to the floor to talk about Earth Day, but listening to what's going on out here makes me think I'll change my subject. I spent 2 years, 1968 to 1970, as a psychiatrist in the United States Navy, taking care of people who lived through what John Kerry went to war about. And for anybody to come out here and attack his war record, you have to have pretty good credentials. Now, if you served and showed up for drills at your local National Guard, I think those would be acceptable credentials. But if you were in the National Guard and you didn't show up, you were AWOL for a whole year, you got real nerve to start an attack on John Kerry's character. During that war, many people on both sides of the issue, whether we should go to war or against the war, acted bravely. But some people were simply not available. They never showed up for their flight physical. They weren't there.
Gentleman from Washington. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, one of the things America abhors is a sneak attack. President Roosevelt in this chamber described Sunday, December 7th as a day that lived in infamy. And what I saw a few minutes ago is a sneak attack on a member of the U.S. Senate by a bunch of my colleagues who came down here and disparaged him contrary to the rules of the House. And the Speaker repeatedly admonished them for violating the best traditions of this House. And my colleagues continually came to the chamber to continually violate those traditions of this House. Now, I want to give notice that we have a long time in this election period coming up. And we have problems deciding what we're going to do about Iraq, and it's not going to help us if we turn this into a chamber of personal assassination. And let me just say, there's a lot of nerve in this chamber attaching a guy who has a Bronze Star, a Silver Star, and Purple Hearts in the tradition of his nation, and it should not be countenanced by the Speaker ever under any circumstances, whether Democrats are in the chamber to object or not.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to raise a question. Is it proper, is it appropriate for members of this body to attack by name?
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute, without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I'm asking a question of the Speaker. And I want to know, is it proper, is it appropriate, is it a violation of the House rule for members to attack members of the other body by name?
When a member of the Senate is a candidate for president, it is proper and fair to speak about the member's record.
Mr. Speaker,
but not to make personal attacks.
It is my understanding this person is not even the nominee of his party yet.
The chair can't rule on that.
He's the presumptive nominee.
The chair is not going to rule on who the nominee is. The gentleman from Georgia has a minute, and his minute has not expired. The gentleman may proceed.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington have a parliamentary inquiry. State it.
Mr. Speaker, is it appropriate for the Speaker who presides over this chamber, when there is a clear and direct personal attack using personally disparaging comments about a member of the United States Senate on a repeated basis, is it appropriate or allowable for the Speaker to interject and prohibit that activity even without a member of the chamber expressing a concern? In other words, does the Speaker have the ability to exercise preemptory power to enforce the rules of this House when there's a sneak attack disparaging the personal integrity of a U.S. Senator?
That is the Speaker's role, and if the member had been in the chamber, you would have seen the Speaker admonish those who were not following the rules. Gentlewoman
If I
from
may
California.
may I ask?
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the Garden Grove Elks Lodge 1952 for their contributions to my community of Garden Grove, California. The Garden Grove Elks Club is just one of thousands of Elks chapters across this nation. They operate on the ideas of charity and patriotism, contributing to schools, police and fire departments, and also working with their youth in their community. The Elks Club consists only of volunteers, those citizens who strive to make a difference based solely on the goodness of their heart. I would also like to recognize Elks Lodge 1952's newly installed officers: Dave Offhouse, Dave Skelton, Gary Mueller, Randy Barrows, Lynn Johnson, and Jim Faulkner. And I wish these new officers much luck in the coming year, and I would also like to extend my appreciation for all that they do for our community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The chair will clarify what he had said to the gentleman from Washington, who I believe has left the chamber. But in any event, in the event that a member does need to be interrupted, the chair will interrupt the member and admonish the member if they are not in comportment with the rules. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that during consideration of H.R. 2844 pursuant to House Resolution 602, the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary be considered as the original bill for the purpose of amendment, and the amendment I have placed at the desk be in order in lieu of the amendment printed in Part B of House Report 108-466 and numbered 3.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in lieu of Amendment Number 3, printed in House Report Number 108-466, offered by Mr. Skelton of Missouri, in Section 26B of the Revised Status of the United States, as proposed to be added by the bill, add at the end of the following new paragraph. 5. Protecting ability of absent military and overseas voters to participate in special elections.
Consider read.
Without objection, the request is granted. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 602 and ask for its immediate consideration.
Clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 166, House Resolution 602, resolved that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House in the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 2844 to require states to hold special elections to fill vacancies in the House of Representatives not later than 21 days after the vacancy is announced by the Speaker of the House of Representatives in extraordinary circumstances and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. Points of order against consideration of the bill for failure to comply with Clause 3C4 of Rule 13 are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 60 minutes, with 40 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chairman and ranking minority member of the Committee on House Administration, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chairman and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary, now printed in the bill, modified by the amendment printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, and shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill or to the amendment in the nature of a substitute made in order as original text. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the ranking minority member of the committee, the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Frost, pending which I yield myself as much time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only, and Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Action.
Mr. Speaker, House Resolution 602 is a structured rule